Okay, so quick heads up before the video starts. I just want to let you all know that we've changed our video editing software. Yeah, after a couple of years, I finally got tired of video pad and how laggy it was. So from now on, my videos will be edited in Wondershare Filmora. That's all I wanted to say. Now onto the video. Hey guys. So at this point I've mostly built up a reputation as a guy who draws fan art for games. Quite a few games as my repertoire of Speedpaint goes to share, and that's not where it stops. Along with games, I've also got some interest in stuff like animated series, and drawn some stuff for those fandoms as well. But there's another form of media that I'm also invested in, one that's often overlooked. That would be the medium of books. Now being a fan of a book is very different compared to being a fan of a game, show or movie, and there are a few reasons why I feel this way. For one, books don't have a visual aspect to them, unless the book is illustrated or it has a cover design that shows the characters on it. Because of this, the world and characters in a book appear however you want them to appear. It's kind of like what I said about Gushing in my Human Sonic video, which if you don't know what I'm talking about, maybe you should go watch that video. But anyway, this whole thing makes reading books feel like much more of a personal deal to me. And I think that's partly why I find it so hard to talk about books to people, because I feel like it's, well, personal. And I kind of wonder if other people feel the same, because the end result is that even if they sell 1 million copies, books are always hovering in obscurity compared to other forms of media. Well, unless your book gets adapted into a musical, an episodic series, or heaven forbid into a movie. Film industry, please stop adapting books into movies, it only works 10% of the time. Books translate way better into series anyway, since it's split into segments like how books have chapters, and having multiple episodes gives you way more screen time to fit in everything the book has to offer. With that thing out of the way, let's get on to the topic. I'm talking about a book called Raven's Gate. Released in 2005, it's the first in a series of 5 books called The Power of 5, written by an English author named Anthony Horowitz. If you're a fellow Englishman who likes books, then you probably know him as the author of Alex Rider, a series about a teenage spy. I've read the entire series in the past, and I'll likely make a Speedpaint video on that series eventually, but until then, let's get back on topic. So how did I find this book? I first learned about The Power of 5, or The Gatekeepers if you're American I guess, from one of those author synopses in every Alex Rider book. It was described as Alex Rider with devils and witches, and back then, Junior School Mirror just thought, okay, neat, and he just never looked into it because he already had Alex Rider. He didn't think he needed any more Horowitz. But that all changed right near the end of 2022, where I started getting more drive to go out and read more books. Long story short, my mum and I had the idea to organise all the books in the house since my siblings had both moved out, and I was the only one left to read stuff. I went through a comically large number of books, and I told my mum which ones I wanted to keep and dispose of with sassy post-it notes. And while on that book spree, I made a couple of discoveries. First there was a copy of Eragon, which I was excited about because I was starting to pick up interest in that series. But then I realised that the copy in question was a tie-in to the movie that everyone hated. Still, I told my sister and she came out as a massive fan of Eragon, so with her recommendation I brought the first 2 books in the series. After ditching the movie tie-in, of course. The other thing I discovered was a copy of Evil Star, the second book in The Power of 5. I think it belonged to my brother, since he was also a fan of Alex Rider, and my sister later confirmed that she'd never read the series. I read the blurb and I quickly noticed mention of The Old Ones, which quickly got me interested because I'm kind of a fan of weird Lovecraftian horrors. You know, Cthulhu and all. This series is actually about Satanism and witchcraft and stuff like that, but yeah. So I wanted to read this series, but we only had the second book, so I decided to ditch the rogue standalone. Then, a few months later, my mum noticed my interest and we bought the whole series. And then I proceeded to make a summoning circle with the books. So that's the story of how I got my hands on The Power of 5. I got the series, I read the first few pages of Raven's Gate, and then I just stopped. Surprisingly, it wasn't because I got distracted by Eragon. I was already on a break from reading that book. No, I was just procrastinating. After not reading any books for 2 months, I eventually remembered that I should probably get back into the habit. I remember that I woke up in the middle of the night because my brain was overloaded, and I needed something to calm me down so I could sleep. And the thing that could calm me down was a creepy book about eldritch horrors. I read the first 3 chapters, started actually shaking after what I read, and ironically enough I had a completely peaceful sleep afterwards. And from there, I kept reading more of the book every morning when I had the chance. It was the Easter holidays, so I had plenty of time, and I finished a whole book in 5 days. So yeah, I guess it's time to commemorate that with some art, and a not so little video where I share all of my thoughts. Let's go! So while the Speedpaint footage goes on, I think I should probably start by explaining the story of Ravensgate, so you actually know what I'm drawing. I'm not going to spoil too much though, in case you want to read the book for yourself, or listen to it in ebook form, that works too. So The Power of Five is a series about 5 teenagers who are destined to put a stop to the reawakening of the old ones. Our story begins with an ominous, faded message.
Before the beginning was the gate, and 5 gatekeepers, children, 4 boys, 1 girl. It has been written. The night of everlasting darkness is drawing in. The gate is about to open. The gatekeepers must return.
So our central character for this story is a 14-year-old named Matt. Full name Matthew Freeman, but never call him that. He's the guy at the front of the art, and spoiler alert, his parents are dead, so he's living with a spiteful aunt over in Ipswich. And Ipswich is a very boring place that he wants to get out of as soon as possible. Not to insult anyone who actually lives in Ipswich, by the way. Anyway, because his current living situation sucks, Matt's trying to save up money so he can get out of this place and lead his own life. And in order to do that, he winds up doing some thievery with this guy Kelvin, who's basically the closest thing he has to a friend. But after a burglary goes horribly wrong, Matt gets in trouble with the police, and instead of locking him up, they decide to put him in a program they call LEAF, sending young offenders off to the far countryside to do manual labour with a foster parent in the hopes that they'll reform. So Matt gets sent off to live in Yorkshire with this very unsettling woman named Jayne Deverill, who lives in a seclusive village called Lesser Malling, a village that's extremely inhospitable, almost as if it's haunted. And with the malicious company of Mrs. Deverill, Matt's determined to find a way out of this wretched place. But that's where I'll leave it for now. On the whole, I really enjoyed my time reading Ravensgate. It's got an unsettling vibe at every turn, and every time I sat down to read a few chapters, I'd come out shivering with shock, terror, sudden desires to convert and submit to the Great Old Ones. To be honest, I don't often like to engage in full-on horror media. I'm a total wuss when it comes to unsettling stuff, and the suspense of being jump-scared or seeing something frightful tends to send me into fits of madness. But honestly, when it comes to written forms, I think I like this kind of stuff a lot more. Though not to extremes, I'd never read a Stephen King book or anything. This book is downright creepy at times, but I found myself genuinely enjoying that horror. I feel like if this was a movie or a series, it'd probably make me really uncomfortable. But with a book, the creepy stuff is all in my imagination, and I can dial it back as much as I need to make it more comfortable to think about. I feel like this nature of books is something that Anthony Horowitz has taken advantage of before. Because if you've read the Alex Rider series, you'd know that those books are pretty violent at times, especially for the kind of books that are suitable for junior school kids. But it didn't really make me uncomfortable, and I think the imagination aspect played into that. Though the way it's written also helps. He doesn't linger on the violence any longer than he needs to, and the few times he did, it was usually in more of an abstract way. Another thing that really had me hooked on Ravensgate was the mystery of it all. Like, Lesser Malling is painted as a really weird and twisted place right from the start, just from the creepy way that people there act, but it leaves you wondering why. And as the book goes on, a new thing is added in almost every chapter, but most of them don't really answer your questions. If anything, they make things feel even more complicated. Why does Mrs. Deverill want Matt to stay in her clutches? What's with the stuff in this creepy forest? What even is Ravensgate? And then, after the halfway point, the story begins to pull your answers into reach, faster and faster as the pace and drama heighten for the finale. I know that this isn't an uncommon formula for a story to follow, but I think it's important to consider why this stuff works. Like, do it right now. Think back to the last story you enjoyed, be it from a game, book, series, whatever. Go over the events of the story in your head and try to remember how they made you feel, and piece together why they made you feel that way. Now, I think it's important to note that no matter how many plot points you introduce, you want to make sure they all contribute to the story and wrap up well at the end so there aren't any loose ends. And yeah, Ravensgate succeeds in that regard. I wouldn't say it's perfect, but I really don't like it when people call things perfect anyway. But my point is, every meaningful thing that the plot sets up is paid off well by the end, and that's definitely a good mark of a well-written story. I'm sorry if I'm kind of getting a bit nerdy here, but as an aspiring writer myself, I'm just trying to study these things and make good sense out of why they work. And I feel like the feelings of suspense and mystery I got from Ravensgate are definitely worth keeping in mind for my future writing endeavours. Though, of course, knowing why something works and actually making it work yourself aren't quite the same thing. Oh well, that's why we gotta practice. Now, along with the story, something else I value in books would be the characters. I feel like with most books, the characters are the things I get attached to the most quickly, most notably the main characters. I think because they thrive in my imagination, book characters tend to be a bit more personal to me than game, series, and especially movie characters, which is probably why I make far more AUs for books than for any other form of media. So with that in mind, yeah, I did indeed get very attached to Matt over the course of this story. He's a pretty edgy guy on the whole. He comes off as withdrawn and closes himself off from people he doesn't trust. Really, he just wants to not be pushed around by the problematic authority figures in his life. And between his parents dying when he was a kid, having it really rough with his aunt in Ipswich, and especially putting up with Deverill, I just think Matt could use some good, considerate people in his life. And a hug. Definitely give this boy a hug. There is another part of Matt's character that I really like later on in the book, when he breaks down and shares all of his problems with Richard Cole, but I'd rather not spoil it. But to give a hint to those who have read the book, it's about how his parents died. But anyway, about Richard Cole, he's the older guy next to Matt in this art, and my second favourite character in this book. Like, he comes off as grouchy and unhelpful at first, but I really like how he has a change of perception as he gets involved in the story later on. But again, I don't want to spoil anything from later in the book too much. Instead, let's talk about Jayne Deverill, our main antagonist. On the whole, I'm much more of a hero person than a villain person, and I found that I haven't read a lot of books where I actually like the main antagonist. And from my experience reading Alex Rider, most of the main villains in that series felt a bit too formulaic and didn't always keep me engaged, especially with the repetitive backstory monologues. Thankfully, there were a few exceptions to this. Julia Rothman was amazing, Scorpio Rising also had a pretty solid villain, and while he's not a main villain, Yasin is iconic and I love him. But again, topic for another video. Needless to say, I was curious to see how Horowitz would write the main villain of a book in another series, and honestly, Jayne really delivered. Every scene she was in, she really effectively stole the attention just with how much of a creepy, hateable, oh you teenagers are all wild savages wretch she is. No joke, just listen to this line! Modern children have no real education. You see them in the streets in their shapeless clothes, listening to what they call music, but what you or I would call a horrible noise. They have no respect, no intelligence, no taste, and they think the world belongs to them! When I first read that line, I had to take a break from reading. Just, oh my god, so nasty. So yeah, I hate this woman, but I love what Deverill does for the story. She kind of reminds me of a crueler, grittier version of Mother Gothel, or the other mother from Coraline. Just a horrible fake parental figure that drives you mad with her sickening words. She doesn't really have a backstory, or much depth at all, but I don't think she really needs it. If there's one thing I learned from watching Puss in Boots: The Last Wish, it's that backstory shouldn't get in the way of pacing or plot, especially with villains. So if you want to establish your bad guy's backstory, don't just have them monologue to the hero, let us learn their backstory through more exciting means. Have the other villains reveal it among their ranks, or have the heroes do some digging themselves. So yeah, those are the main characters covered. There are plenty of other characters that are notable, but I didn't want to reveal too much of what this book has to offer, so I just talked about the three most main characters, the same ones I'm drawing in the Speedpaint. Speaking of the Speedpaint, how about we talk about the art? So as I said before, the fun thing about drawing fan art for books is that you can really depict what the book tells you however you want. Because the stuff you're drawing is all in your imagination, everyone's art of the same character is inevitably going to look different. Unless you're going off a book that actually has character designs in the cover art or illustrations. So despite this being fan art, what I'm drawing here is technically original. Starting with Matt and his design, I first drew him in February, shortly after getting the book and reading those first few pages. One thing I really appreciate about Horowitz's writing style is that he's pretty consistent in making it clear how his characters are meant to look. Even just something as simple as he has green eyes or she has platinum blonde hair is really helpful for me because I like being able to have more of a consistent image on how the character looks. But Horowitz does tend to go the extra mile when it comes to description. So with Matt, I kept all the information I was given. Blue eyes, very short black hair, grey hooded sweatshirt, from his edgy personality and being said to look somehow dangerous right out the gate, I tried to make that come across in his design. Now here's something worth noting. I drew this design at a time where I was experimenting more with how I draw male characters. I was trying out two main things. The first was how I draw bulkier characters, while the second was trying to draw different types of hair, since a lot of my male characters have similarly looking spiky anime hair. Well, it just so happened that Matt filled both of those quotas. With the build, I made him a bit beefier than he was probably intended to be, mostly so I could get some more practice in this kind of thing. Though in the long run, I think it's a good move to differentiate him from the other protagonists who are set up to show in later books. As for his hair, I had the chance to give the character a much shorter hair than I normally draw, and I tried to make the spikes particularly bristly. Also, this next bit is entirely my doing and not at all a thing in the book. I decided to give him an undercut, just because, again, I'm trying to experiment with not drawing the same anime hair on every guy I draw. I think my favourite thing about this Matt design would be his eyes. They're very different from the eyes I normally draw, with a flat top edge. I know it's not entirely flat here, but that's because of the shocked expression, and I still made sure not to raise his eyelids too much to keep the intention. I like these eyes, I think they fit the edgy vibes I'm trying to deliver, and I should definitely give them to more of my characters. While I'd already made this design for Matt before and had the chance to define it some more, I hadn't done the same for Richard Cole on Mrs. Deverill. Okay, in Deverill's case, that wasn't a big deal, since I was only planning to draw the lower half of her face in this composition. I used the shading and perspective to put emphasis on her wicked smile. The book says that it's hard to imagine her ever smiling, but I tried to keep this in mind by giving her smile a crooked shape. The most fun part of the design was the clothes, with the black, kind of posh look to them, a nice contrast to the clothes that Matt and Richard wear, though I did have a bit of a struggle because I made her outfit too upper class at first. I also like how I made her jewellery brighter to put contrast to the darkness she's surrounded in. I do have a few self-criticisms to make though. For starters, while I like the position of the hand, I completely goofed up and now she has two left hands. I also kind of forgot her description saying that she has pale lips. I just gave her red lips to match her nails and the eyes on her brooch. I also don't like the overly pronounced cheekbones. That's a major detail in the book that I wanted to carry over, but I don't think they work with the narrow, pointed face shape I gave her. Though to be fair, my art style in general doesn't really work with cheekbones. Oh well, good notes for future reference. Now for Richard Cole, I had to cook up a whole design for him from scratch. Now I was really fond of the way that Horowitz had described him upon his introduction. Everything about him was crumpled. His hair, his clothes, even the way he stood. I've never really drawn crumpled clothes before, but this was a good practice. I could have crumpled the shirt more, but I'm really bad at figuring out where clothing folds go. As a side note, I don't think he's supposed to wear a dress shirt and tie, but that really fit the crumpled image in my head. I also just think the image of a guy who dresses smart but doesn't have the energy to clean his clothes is a really fun idea, which suits his personality well. Another part that I took liberties with, but definitely had fun designing, was his hair. I know the book says that he has short hair, but I gave him a longer, kind of floppy front mass of hair, with shorter and darker hair on the sides and back. I was very much inspired by this customer I saw at work lately, who had a similar sort of front-flopping hairstyle. He was very cute, very androgynous, and again, I enjoyed drawing Richard's hair because it gave me a chance to practice different hair designs on male characters, getting out of the anime boy trapping and all. Now that the 3 human characters are done, I want to talk about the other characters I put in the art. First is the black cat Asmodeus, who I wanted to have stalk our protagonists, and to fill up the empty space on the left of the path. I really liked how dark I made the cat, so that the focus really comes to his glowing green eyes and the red rim lighting, which I'll get back to in a second. Then, in the air I put a pair of pterodactyl skeletons, which probably make no sense if you haven't read the book, but if you know, you know. The whole skeleton thing was one of my favourite parts of the book and I wanted to give it justice. Plus, I like how they frame Mrs. Deverill's sides, it's a pretty cool composition. If you've watched my Pokemon videos, you'll notice I'm not great at drawing animals. For Asmodeus, I didn't find that a problem. I'd say I'm decent at drawing cats, but the skeletons were a whole different story. I tried looking up pterodactyl skeletons, and I kind of had no idea what I was looking at, especially with the wing arms, but I managed to figure it out in the end. The other tricky part was the pose. I couldn't find any good references, so I was stuck for quite a while making the skeletons look quite how I wanted them to. In the end, I decided to reference this panel of Aerodactyl from Pokemon Adventures, which definitely helped. I drew the skeletons with these separated bones to really sell the image of them being haunted and reanimated. I did the same thing with my various skeleton Fakemon, which served as a major inspiration for these guys. And now we get to the matter of the shading. I wanted to darken the colours of the piece as a whole to really sell that creepy nighttime feeling. But to add a bit more pop, and to make it even creepier, I also added red rim lights to the edges of the characters. Rim lighting, to those who don't know, is a technique where you add some coloured lights to the edge of your outlines to signify that light of that colour is shining onto your character. I'd seen rim lighting brought up on Drawfee here on YouTube a lot of times, but I'd never really done it before, so I wanted to give it a shot. Though more notably, I was very inspired by the webcomic Beneath the Woods. It's a supernatural horror webcomic that makes really good use out of creepy lighting to create atmosphere, including with these spooky red rim lights. I didn't put any of them on Deverill though, since she's meant to be the source of the lights, in a weird creepy influence kind of way. Plus, not giving her the rim lighting makes her stand out compared to the other characters. Another thing I wanted to do was play with the shading colours. I gave blue shadows to Matt and Richard, but then for the skeletons and Asmodeus I gave them red shadows to make them feel less natural, and to tie them in more to the red rim lights. I thought the skeletons stood out too much with the red shadows though, so I ended up giving them a partial shadow instead of a full shadow. And finally for Deverill, I made her shadows black, which blend in with the night sky and her black clothes to make her fade into the darkness more. The last thing I'd like to talk about would be the characters' eyes. With Matt, Richard and Asmodeus, I made sure not to put any shading over their eyes to make them brighter and help them stand out. I also wanted to try out a terrified expression with Matt and Richard's eyes by making the irises much smaller and not giving them pupils. Just some fun stylization to make the emotions read clearer. I'd really like to sit down and draw a whole sheet of stylized facial expressions, just to get more practice with that kind of thing. And with that, we've covered everything I want to say about this art. So in conclusion, Ravensgate was a great read. And to think, my creepy adventures with the Great Old Ones have only just begun. There's still 4 more books to read, each progressively thicker than the last, as tends to be the case with series like this. Plus, with 4 more protagonists to meet, I'm really looking forward to getting to see them in action. Now before I start reading Evil Star, I'm probably going to shift gears for a while and get back to reading some more Eragon. Thanks for watching this video. Be sure to leave a like and subscribe to the channel. I haven't made any other videos about books yet, but I definitely want to carry on down this road. Books don't get a lot of love, and I'd like to give them the justice they deserve. Also, be sure to follow my Twitter and Instagram, where I post all of my art for the public, and sometimes tweet dumb stuff about whatever book I'm reading. My next video will probably be another uncommentated speed paint, but I have been interested in making animatics lately, so maybe I'll do that instead? We'll see. But anyway, stay hopeful, don't give up on your dreams, try not to run into creepy bogs in the forest, and I'll see you all next time.